She was abandoned. When they read the will, the two sons were stunned to discover that the sun had barely risen over the quaint town of Oakville, Maine, when Evelyn Caldwell's voice echoed through her Victorian mansion. At 75, she stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand clenched in frustration. "Michael, it's been months since you visited," Evelyn said, her voice strained. "I'm your mother, for heaven's sake." "Mom, we've been over this." Michael's exasperated voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm swamped with work. Sarah's the same. We can't just drop everything and come running." Evelyn's shoulders sagged. "I'm not asking for much. Just a call now and then. Is that too much to ask?" "Look, Mom, I've got a meeting. We'll talk later, okay?" Michael's tone left no room for argument. "Michael, wait." The line went dead. Evelyn stared at the phone, tears welling in her eyes. She shuffled to the back door, needing fresh air. As she stepped into her once vibrant garden, now overgrown from neglect, memories flooded her mind. She remembered Michael's high school graduation, how proud she'd been. Sarah's first ballet recital, the way her daughter had beamed at her from the stage. When had it all changed? When had her children become strangers? The weight of loneliness pressed down on Evelyn, her vision blurred, the world spinning around her. She reached for something to steady herself, but her hand grasped only air. In an instant, everything went black. Tom Peterson, Evelyn's 28-year-old neighbor, was mowing his lawn when he glanced over at the Caldwell property. His eyes widened as he saw Evelyn collapse. "Mrs. Caldwell?" Tom shouted, vaulting over the low fence separating their yards. He rushed to her side, kneeling beside her still form. "Mrs. Caldwell, can you hear me?" Tom gently shook her shoulder. No response. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Street," Tom said, his voice urgent. "My neighbor's collapsed in her garden. She's unresponsive." As he waited for the ambulance, Tom held Evelyn's hand, silently willing her to wake up. He thought about how often he'd seen her in this garden, always alone, a shadow of the vibrant woman who'd welcomed him to the neighborhood years ago. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens piercing the quiet morning. Paramedics swarmed around Evelyn, their movements quick and precise. "BP's low," one paramedic announced. "We need to move her now." As they loaded Evelyn into the ambulance, Tom felt a pang of worry. "I'll follow you to the hospital," he told the paramedics. At the hospital, Tom paced the waiting room, his mind racing. He'd tried calling the numbers Evelyn had given him for emergencies, her children's numbers, but neither Michael nor Sarah had answered. Hours passed before a doctor approached Tom. "Are you family?" the doctor asked. Tom shook his head. "No, I'm her neighbor, her family. They're not here." The doctor's expression turned grave. "I see. Well, Mrs. Caldwell is stable, but I'm afraid we've found some concerning test results. We'll need to run more tests to confirm, but it appears to be more serious than we initially thought." Tom's heart sank. "How serious?" "I'd rather discuss that with her family," the doctor said. "Can you reach them?" Tom nodded, though he wasn't sure he could. As the doctor walked away, Tom pulled out his phone again. He had to keep trying. Evelyn needed her family now more than ever. As he dialed Michael's number once more, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey for Evelyn, and perhaps for him as well. Evelyn Caldwell sat in the sterile hospital room, her hands folded in her lap, as she listened to Dr. Jameson's words. Each syllable felt like a hammer blow, shattering the illusion of time she thought she had. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm afraid the tests confirm our initial suspicions," Dr. Jameson said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Given its advanced state, we estimate you have about 6 months. Evelyn nodded, her face a mask of calm. "I see. And treatment options? We can try chemotherapy to extend your time and manage symptoms, but I must be honest, it won't be a cure." As Dr. Jameson continued explaining, Evelyn's mind drifted. 6 months, half a year to put her affairs in order, to make amends, to leave a legacy. "Thank you, doctor," Evelyn said, cutting through his medical jargon. "I'd like some time to think." Left alone, Evelyn's composure cracked. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she quickly wiped them away. There was no time for self-pity. She had decisions to make. Later that day, Tom visited her in the hospital. "Mrs. Caldwell, how are you feeling?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Evelyn managed a small smile. "I've been better, Tom. But I need a favor. Could you bring me the phone book from my study? I need to contact a lawyer. Tom's eyebrows shot up. A lawyer? Is everything okay? It will be, Evelyn said firmly. I just need to make some changes to my will. The next day, Grace Thompson stood outside Evelyn's hospital room, smoothing her suit. At 28, she was younger than most of her colleagues at the law firm, but her reputation for handling delicate cases had earned her this assignment. She knocked and entered. Mrs. Caldwell? I'm Grace Thompson from Hartley & Associates. You requested legal assistance? Evelyn looked up, her eyes sharp despite her frail appearance. Yes, come in, Miss Thompson. I need to rewrite my will, and time is of the essence. As Grace set up her laptop, Evelyn studied her. You remind me of my granddaughter, she mused. She'd be about your age now if... Grace looked up, curiosity piqued. If? Evelyn shook her head. Never mind, let's focus on the task at hand. Over the next hour, Evelyn outlined her wishes, surprising Grace with her clarity and determination. As they wrapped up, Evelyn reached for a small box on her nightstand. There's one more thing, Evelyn said, opening the box to reveal an antique gold medallion. This needs to be included in the will, but its true significance must remain a secret for now. Grace leaned closer, intrigued. The medallion was beautiful, adorned with intricate engravings. May I ask its significance? Evelyn's fingers traced the medallion's surface. Let's just say it holds a secret that could change everything. But it's not time yet. Promise me you'll keep this confidential. Grace nodded, sensing the weight of Evelyn's words. Of course, Mrs. Caldwell. Attorney-client privilege. As Grace prepared to leave, Evelyn caught her hand. Thank you, Miss Thompson. I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other. Grace squeezed Evelyn's hand gently. I'll do my best to ensure your wishes are carried out, Mrs. Caldwell. After Grace left, Evelyn sank back into her pillows, exhausted but satisfied. She'd set things in motion. Now, she just had to wait for the storm that would surely come. That storm arrived sooner than expected. The next morning, Evelyn was awakened by raised voices in the hallway. What do you mean? She's terminally ill, Michael's voice boomed. Why weren't we informed immediately? Sir, please lower your voice, a nurse responded. We've been trying to reach you for days. Evelyn sighed, bracing herself. The door burst open, revealing Michael and Sarah, both looking flustered and angry. Mom? Sarah exclaimed, rushing to the bedside. Why didn't you tell us? We had to hear it from your neighbor. Evelyn met her daughter's gaze steadily. I've been trying to reach you both for weeks. You were too busy, remember? Michael stepped forward, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. That's not fair, Mom. We have lives, responsibilities. And I'm dying, Evelyn said bluntly, watching her children flinch at her words. But now that you're here, we have much to discuss. The siblings exchanged glances, caught off guard by their mother's directness. They had expected tears, perhaps accusations, but not this calm resolve. What do you mean, discuss? Michael asked warily. Evelyn's eyes flickered to the medallion on her nightstand, then back to her children. It's time for some changes. I've already started the process. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? The tension in the room was palpable as Michael and Sarah realized that their mother's illness was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their family. The sleek BMW pulled into the driveway of the Caldwell mansion, its engine purring to a stop. Michael stepped out, adjusting his designer suit, while Sarah emerged from the passenger side, her high heels clicking on the pavement. Can you believe Mom's living in this dump? Sarah muttered, eyeing the overgrown garden. Michael shushed her. Remember, we're concerned children visiting our sick mother. Act the part. They approached the front door, plastering on sympathetic expressions. Tom, who was leaving after checking on Evelyn, met them at the entrance. You must be Michael and Sarah, Tom said, his tone cool. Your mother's resting upstairs. As they entered, Grace emerged from the study, arms full of legal documents. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the siblings. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, I presume? Grace said. I'm Grace Thompson, your mother's attorney. Michael's eyebrows shot up. Attorney? What's going on here? Grace stood her ground. I'm helping your mother update her legal affairs. Given her condition, it's necessary. Sarah's fake smile faltered. Surely that can wait. We're here to spend time with our dear mother. Grace's reply was cut short by Evelyn's voice from upstairs. Michael? Sarah? Is that you?" The siblings hurried upstairs, leaving Grace in the foyer. She couldn't shake the feeling that their concern was a facade. In Evelyn's bedroom, an awkward reunion unfolded. Michael and Sarah hovered by the bed, unsure how to act around the mother they'd neglected for years. "Mom, you look..." Sarah struggled for words. "Dying?" Evelyn supplied dryly. "It's okay, you can say it." Michael cleared his throat. "We came as soon as we heard. We've been so worried." Evelyn's eyes betrayed her skepticism. "Have you? It's been quite a while since I've heard from either of you." Sarah perched on the edge of the bed, taking Evelyn's hand. "We're here now, Mom. That's what matters." As the conversation continued, filled with platitudes and forced affection, Grace listened from the hallway. The disconnect between the siblings' words and their body language was glaring. Later, as Michael and Sarah settled into their old rooms, Grace cornered Tom in the kitchen. "What do you know about them?" she asked, nodding towards the stairs. Tom sighed. "Not much. They rarely visit. Evelyn's been alone for years." Grace's suspicions grew. "They seem awfully interested in Evelyn's legal affairs." "You think they're after her money?" Tom asked, lowering his voice. "I think there's more going on than filial concern," Grace replied. That night, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, Grace found herself drawn to Evelyn's study. She needed to understand the family dynamics she'd stepped into. As she sifted through old files, a stack of bank statements caught her eye. They showed large transfers from Evelyn's account to both Michael and Sarah over the years. "What have you two been up to?" Grace murmured. A noise in the hallway startled her. She quickly replaced the documents and slipped out of the study, nearly colliding with Michael. "Miss Thompson," he said, his tone sharp, "burning the midnight oil." Grace met his gaze steadily. "Just ensuring all of Mrs. Caldwell's affairs are in order." Michael's eyes narrowed. "I hope you remember who the family is here. We'll be making decisions about my mother's care moving forward." "Of course," Grace replied smoothly. "I'm just here to carry out your mother's wishes." As Michael retreated to his room, Grace's resolve strengthened. She needed to protect Evelyn from whatever her children were planning. The next morning, tension simmered over breakfast. Sarah peppered Grace with questions about Evelyn's will, while Michael scrutinized every legal document in sight. Evelyn watched this dance with a mix of sadness and resignation. She'd hoped her children's return might bridge the gap years of neglect had created. Instead, she saw only thinly veiled greed. "I think it's time we discuss my treatment options," Evelyn announced, cutting through the chatter. Sarah jumped in eagerly. "Of course, Mom. We'll spare no expense. There must be experimental treatments we can try." "Actually," Evelyn said firmly, "I've decided against aggressive treatment. I want to focus on quality of life in the time I have left." Michael and Sarah exchanged alarmed looks. "But Mom," Michael protested, "surely you want to fight this?" "I've been fighting for years," Evelyn replied. "It's time to make peace." As the siblings launched into arguments about second opinions and miracle cures, Grace caught Evelyn's eye. The older woman gave a slight nod, confirming Grace's suspicions about the true nature of this family reunion. Later, as Grace prepared to leave for the day, she overheard a heated whisper between Michael and Sarah in the garden. "We need that money, Sarah," Michael hissed. "The creditors are breathing down my neck." "I know," Sarah replied. "Just keep it together. We'll figure something out." Grace slipped away, her mind racing. The siblings' financial troubles explained their sudden interest in their dying mother. But how far would they go to secure their inheritance? As she drove away from the Caldwell mansion, Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "We need to talk. There's more you need to know." Grace realized she'd stumbled into a family drama far more complex than she'd anticipated. The battle for Evelyn's legacy was just beginning, and Grace was determined to ensure justice prevailed. Grace sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of documents. She'd been digging into the Caldwell family's past for days, and what she'd uncovered was troubling. Bank statements, property records, and old newspaper clippings painted a picture of financial manipulation that extended far beyond the family. She picked up a faded article from the local paper. The headline read, "Caldwell Investments Brings Promise of Jobs." Below it, a younger Michael smiled confidently. Grace had found several similar articles, all touting the economic benefits Michael and Sarah's various ventures would bring to Oakville. But the reality was far different. Grace had uncovered a trail of failed businesses, unpaid debts, and broken promises. The siblings had used their family name to secure investments from the community, only to leave dozens of families in financial ruin when their schemes collapsed. Grace's phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom. "Found something interesting. Can you come by the house?" At the Caldwell mansion, Tom led Grace to the attic. "I was helping Evelyn sort through some old boxes," he explained, "and I found this." He handed her a dusty photo album. Grace flipped it open, her eyes widening at the images. They showed a much younger Evelyn, clearly pregnant, standing alone outside a small apartment. "I've never seen these before," Grace murmured. Tom nodded. "There's more. Look at the last page." Grace turned to the back of the album. There, tucked into the sleeve, was a birth certificate. The mother's name was clear, Evelyn Caldwell, but the father's name had been redacted. "Do you think?" Tom began, his voice uncertain. Grace met his gaze. "We need to talk to Evelyn." Downstairs, they found Evelyn in the sunroom, with Michael and Sarah hovering nearby. The siblings' faces darkened at the sight of Grace. "Mrs. Caldwell," Grace said, "we need to discuss some things I've discovered." Michael stepped forward. "Whatever you think you've found, it's none of your business." Grace stood her ground. "Actually, Mr. Caldwell, when it affects your mother's estate in the community, it very much is my business." She laid out the documents she'd gathered, explaining the pattern of financial manipulation she'd uncovered. As she spoke, she watched the siblings' reactions carefully. Michael's jaw clenched, while Sarah's eyes darted nervously around the room. "These are baseless accusations," Sarah sputtered, but Evelyn held up a hand, silencing her daughter. "Let her finish, Sarah." Grace continued, detailing how the community had suffered due to the Caldwell siblings' actions. As she spoke, she noticed Tom listening intently, a mix of shock and confusion on his face. When Grace finished, the room fell silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, Evelyn began to laugh. It was a tired, sad sound. "Oh, Michael, Sarah," she sighed. "Did you think I didn't know?" The siblings stared at their mother in disbelief. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I've spent years covering for you, trying to make amends to the people you've hurt. Do you have any idea what that's cost me?" As Evelyn spoke, memories flooded back. She remembered the long nights working multiple jobs, the constant struggle to provide for her children as a single mother. She'd sacrificed everything for them, hoping they'd grow into responsible adults. Instead, they'd exploited her love and the family name for their own gain. Michael's composure cracked. "Mom, you don't understand. We were just trying to live up to the Caldwell name, to make something of ourselves. By destroying others?" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "That's not the legacy I wanted for this family." Sarah, tears streaming down her face, sank into a chair. "We never meant for it to go this far. Things just got out of control." As the family drama unfolded, Tom stood silently, his mind reeling. The photo album weighed heavily in his hands. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw something familiar in her features. Grace, sensing the shift in the room, turned to Tom. "Is there something else?" Tom hesitated, then stepped forward, holding out the album. "Mrs. Caldwell, I think there's something you need to explain." Evelyn's eyes widened as she saw the album. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "In the attic," Tom replied. "Mrs. Caldwell? Evelyn, who am I?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to Evelyn. She clutched the album to her chest, her eyes moving from Tom to her other children, then back to Tom. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time I told you all the truth. The whole truth." Michael and Sarah exchanged confused glances while Grace watched the scene unfold with growing understanding. The Caldwell family secrets ran deeper than anyone had imagined, and they were about to come to light. As Evelyn prepared to speak, the tension in the room was palpable. Whatever she was about to reveal would change everything, not just for Tom, but for the entire Caldwell legacy. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Evelyn. She took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the edges of the photo album. "Tom," Evelyn began, her voice barely above a whisper, "you're right to ask questions. The truth is, you're my son." The words hung in the air, heavy with decades of secrecy. Tom staggered back, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. "What?" Michael exclaimed, breaking the silence. "That's impossible." Evelyn shook her head. It's true. Tom was born before I met your father, Michael. I was young, alone, and scared. Sarah, her voice trembling, asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" "I thought I was protecting everyone," Evelyn replied. "I gave Tom up for adoption, believing he'd have a better life. It was the hardest decision I've ever made." Tom, still reeling, asked, "How long have you known it was me?" "I suspected when you moved in next door," Evelyn admitted, "but I wasn't certain until recently. I'm so sorry, Tom. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid." The room erupted into chaos. Michael and Sarah fired questions at Evelyn, their voices rising with each passing moment. Tom stood silently, trying to process the revelation that had turned his world upside down. Grace, sensing the need to regain control, stepped in. "Everyone, please. Let's take a moment to calm down." As the commotion subsided, Evelyn reached for the medallion on her nightstand. "There's more you need to know," she said, her voice steadier now. "This medallion, it's not just a family heirloom. It holds a secret." All eyes focused on the small golden object in Evelyn's hand. "Inside this medallion is a key," Evelyn explained. "A key to a safety deposit box. In that box are documents detailing the location of the true Caldwell family treasure." Michael leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Treasure? What kind of treasure?" "Art, jewels, gold, a fortune amassed by your great-grandfather," Evelyn said. "He hid it away during the Depression, fearing it would be seized. Only the firstborn of each generation was told its location." Sarah's face contorted with anger. "And you're just telling us this now? After everything we've been through?" Evelyn's gaze hardened. "I've seen what the pursuit of wealth has done to this family. I wasn't sure any of you were ready for this responsibility." Tom, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Why tell us now?" "Because I'm dying," Evelyn said simply. "And I need to know this secret will be in the right hands." The room fell silent again as the weight of Evelyn's words sank in. The revelation of the hidden treasure added a new layer of complexity to an already tense situation. Grace watched as emotions played across everyone's faces. Michael and Sarah looked torn between shock at Tom's existence and greed for the newfound treasure. Tom seemed overwhelmed, grappling with his new identity and unexpected inheritance. "Mrs. Caldwell," Grace said gently, "this changes things legally. We'll need to revisit your will." Evelyn nodded. "I know, that's why I wanted you here, Grace. I trust you to help me make this right." As the family tried to process everything, Tom suddenly stood up. I need some air," he mumbled, heading for the door. "Tom, wait," Evelyn called, but he was already gone. Michael turned to Evelyn, his voice cold. "You can't seriously be considering including him in the will. He's a stranger." "He's my son," Evelyn replied firmly, "just like you." Sarah, her voice shaking, added, "This isn't fair, Mom. We're your family. We've been here." "Have you?" Evelyn asked softly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Grace, sensing the need to diffuse the situation, suggested, "Perhaps we should all take some time to process this. We can discuss the legal implications tomorrow." As everyone filed out of the room, Evelyn caught Grace's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm going to need your help more than ever now." Grace nodded, her mind already racing with the legal complexities of the situation. As she left the Caldwell mansion, she saw Tom sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands. She approached him cautiously. "Tom, are you okay?" He looked up, his eyes red. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. Grace sat beside him. "You're still you, Tom. You just have more family than you realized." As they sat in silence, Grace's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Representing Michael and Sarah Caldwell. We need to talk about contesting Evelyn's will. Urgent." Grace stared at the message, realizing that the battle for the Caldwell legacy was about to get much more complicated. The Caldwell mansion was a powder keg of emotions in the days following Tom's revelation. The once quiet halls now echoed with heated arguments and hushed conspiracies. Michael cornered Tom in the study, his voice low and threatening. "You can't just waltz in here and expect a piece of the pie. We're her real family." Tom stood his ground. "I didn't ask for this, Michael. I'm just trying to understand where I come from." Sarah, joining the fray, added, "Do you have any idea what we've sacrificed for this family? You're an outsider." As the siblings argued, Grace and Evelyn watched from the doorway. Evelyn sighed, the weight of her decisions heavy on her shoulders. Later, Grace found Tom in the garden, looking lost. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Tom shook his head. I don't know. Part of me wants to run back to my old life, but you feel a connection here," Grace finished. Tom nodded. "We need to protect Evelyn," Grace said. "Michael and Sarah, I don't trust their motives." Tom agreed, and they began sharing what they knew, forming an unlikely alliance. Meanwhile, Michael and Sarah met with their lawyer, Richard Hartley, in a cafe downtown. "We need to contest the will," Michael insisted. "There must be a way to prove Mom's not of sound mind." Hartley leaned in, his voice low. "It won't be easy, but if we can prove undue influence from this newfound son." Sarah nodded eagerly. "We'll do whatever it takes." Back at the mansion, Evelyn called her children to her room one by one. She started with Michael. "I know you're angry," she began. Michael paced the room. "Angry? You've lied to us our entire lives." "I made mistakes," Evelyn admitted, "but everything I did was to protect this family." As she spoke, Evelyn revealed more about her past, the struggles of being a young single mother, the pain of giving up Tom, the pressure of maintaining the Caldwell legacy. Michael listened, his anger warring with a long-buried love for his mother. Sarah's conversation was equally emotional. "Did you ever really love us?" she asked, tears in her eyes. Evelyn reached for her daughter's hand. "With all my heart, but love doesn't mean blindness to faults." Tom's turn came last. He entered hesitantly, still unsure of his place. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Evelyn said. Tom sat on the edge of the bed. "Why did you give me up?" Evelyn's voice cracked as she explained the circumstances of his birth, the pressure from her family, her fear of scandal. As the day wore on, Grace worked tirelessly on Evelyn's new will, but something nagged at her. The rivalry between the siblings, the sudden appearance of Hartley, it all seemed too convenient. Digging deeper, Grace uncovered communications between Michael, Sarah, and Hartley dating back weeks. They had been planning to contest the will even before Tom's revelation. Grace's ethical dilemma grew. Her duty was to Evelyn, but the family drama was becoming personal. As night fell, Evelyn called everyone to her room. "I've made my decisions," she announced. "The will." Suddenly, Evelyn clutched her chest, gasping for air. The room erupted into chaos. "Mom?" Sarah cried, rushing to her side. "Call an ambulance," Michael shouted. As Tom dialed 911, Grace watched the scene unfold. In that moment of crisis, she saw genuine fear and love in the eyes of all three siblings. The paramedics arrived quickly, whisking Evelyn away. As the ambulance sped off, the 4 remaining occupants of the house stood in shocked silence. Grace looked at each of them. Michael and Sarah, their faces pale with worry. Tom, looking lost and scared. The animosity of the past days seemed to evaporate in the face of potentially losing Evelyn. "We should get to the hospital," Grace said softly. As they piled into cars, Grace couldn't help but wonder, would this health scare be the wake-up call the Caldwell family needed? Or would it only intensify the battle for Evelyn's legacy? At the hospital, they waited in tense silence. The doctor finally emerged, his face grave. "Mrs. Caldwell has suffered a minor heart attack," he explained. "She's stable, but this is a serious warning sign." Michael, his voice uncharacteristically shaky, asked, "Can we see her?" The doctor nodded, briefly, "And please, no excitement, she needs rest." As they filed into Evelyn's room, Grace hung back, watching the family reunite. For a moment, she saw not rivals, but a mother and her children facing the reality of limited time. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, taking in the sight of all 3 of her children at her bedside. A weak smile crossed her face. "My children," she whispered, "all of you." In that moment, surrounded by machines and uncertainty, the Caldwells were just a family, brought together by crisis. But Grace knew the peace was fragile. Once the immediate danger passed, the battle for the Caldwell legacy would resume. As she watched, Grace steeled herself for what was to come. The real fight was just beginning. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity as doctors and nurses rushed in and out of Evelyn's room. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly, and the prognosis was grim. Michael paced outside, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine worry. Sarah sat nearby, her makeup streaked with tears. Tom stood at the window, feeling like an outsider yet unable to leave. The doctor emerged, his face somber. "Mrs. Caldwell is stable but critical. You should prepare yourselves." Grace, who had been working tirelessly on Evelyn's legal affairs, approached the siblings. "She's asking to see each of you, individually." Michael entered first. Evelyn lay in the hospital bed, looking frail but alert. "Michael," she whispered, "come closer." As he sat beside her, Evelyn took his hand. "I know I wasn't always the mother you needed," she began. Michael's composure cracked. "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything." Evelyn smiled weakly. "I know, sweetheart, I am too." She then revealed a story from his childhood, a time when she'd worked 3 jobs just to afford his school trip. Michael listened, realizing the depths of his mother's sacrifices. Sarah's visit was equally emotional. Evelyn shared memories of Sarah's early ballet recitals and the pride she felt watching her daughter perform. "I always wanted more for you than I had," Evelyn admitted. Sarah, overcome with guilt, confessed her financial troubles. Evelyn squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out together." Tom's turn came last. He entered hesitantly, still unsure of his place. Evelyn's eyes lit up. "My boy," she said softly. As they talked, Evelyn revealed the circumstances of his birth and the heart-wrenching decision to give him up. "I thought I was giving you your best chance," she explained, tears in her eyes. Tom, overwhelmed, forgave her. "I'm just glad I found you," he said. Outside, Grace worked feverishly to finalize Evelyn's will according to her latest wishes. The gravity of her responsibility weighed heavily on her. Suddenly, a commotion erupted in the waiting area. A man in an expensive suit was arguing with a nurse. "I'm Robert Caldwell, Evelyn's cousin. I demand to see her," Grace intervened. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Evelyn's attorney. What's this about?" Robert turned to her, his eyes narrow. "I'm here to protect the family interests. Evelyn's not in her right mind to be making decisions about the estate." Grace stood her ground. "Mrs. Caldwell is perfectly competent, Mr. Caldwell. Any changes to her will are her decision alone." As the argument escalated, Michael, Sarah, and Tom emerged from Evelyn's room. "What's going on?" Michael demanded. Robert sneered. "Ah, the prodigal children return. And who's this?" he asked, eyeing Tom suspiciously. Before anyone could respond, a nurse rushed out. "She's asking for all of you. Now." They filed into Evelyn's room, tension thick in the air. Evelyn looked at each of them, her gaze clear and determined. "I know you're all here because of the will," she began. "But there's something you need to understand. The Caldwell fortune, it's more than any of you imagine." Gasps filled the room. Evelyn continued, "Our family's true wealth has been hidden for generations. It's time you knew the truth." She then revealed a tale of secret investments, hidden art collections, and offshore accounts that had been growing for decades. The true value of the Caldwell estate was staggering. As the siblings and Robert absorbed this information, their expressions a mix of shock and greed, Evelyn turned to Grace. "It's time," she said softly. Grace nodded, understanding. She pulled out the latest draft of the will, ready to make any final changes Evelyn desired. Robert stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute. Evelyn, you can't possibly be thinking clearly. This is clearly undue influence." Evelyn's voice, though weak, carried authority. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Robert, and I know exactly what I'm doing." She then dropped another bombshell. "There's more to the story, more that you all need to know. About our family's past, about the choices I've made." The room fell silent. Evelyn took a deep breath. "Grace, I need you to arrange one last family meeting. It's time everyone knew the whole truth." Grace nodded, feeling the weight of Evelyn's words. She knew that whatever Evelyn was planning to reveal would change the Caldwell family forever. As she left to make the arrangements, Grace couldn't help but wonder, what secrets had Evelyn been keeping all these years? And how would these revelations affect the battle for the Caldwell legacy? The stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would either tear the family apart or, perhaps, bring them together in a way they never expected. The Caldwell mansion's dining room, unused for years, was now the stage for what Evelyn had dubbed the Last Supper. The table was set, the candles lit, and an air of anticipation hung heavy in the room. Michael, Sarah, Tom, Robert, and Grace took their seats, exchanging wary glances. Evelyn, against medical advice, had insisted on leaving the hospital for this final family meeting. As the first course was served, Evelyn cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. We have much to discuss." The tension was palpable as Evelyn began her speech. "For years, I've carried the weight of our family's secrets. It's time you knew the truth." She recounted tales of her early life, revealing sacrifices the children had never known. How she'd sold her beloved piano to pay for Michael's first semester of college. the night job she took to afford Sarah's ballet lessons. Michael and Sarah listened, their faces a mix of shock and shame. The magnitude of their mother's sacrifices began to sink in. "But there's more," Evelyn continued. She reached for the medallion around her neck. "This isn't just a family heirloom. It's a key." The room fell silent as Evelyn explained. Inside is a microchip containing coordinates. These lead to a hidden vault, housing our family's true legacy. Grace, ever the professional, couldn't hide her surprise. This was beyond anything she'd anticipated. Evelyn went on, describing a collection of priceless artworks amassed by her grandfather during his travels. Paintings, sculptures, artifacts, a treasure trove of cultural and monetary value. "The total worth," Evelyn said, her voice steady, "is estimated at over $100 million. Gasps echoed around the table. Robert's eyes gleamed with undisguised greed. Michael and Sarah exchanged stunned looks, while Tom sat in disbelief. "But," Evelyn continued, "this wealth comes with a responsibility, a moral obligation." She explained how her grandfather had acquired many pieces during turbulent times, some through questionable means. "It's our duty to right these wrongs," she said firmly. Then came the challenge. "I'm leaving the decision of what to do with this collection up to you. All of you. You must decide, unanimously, how to handle this legacy." The siblings looked at each other, the weight of the decision evident on their faces. "You have 3 choices," Evelyn explained. "Keep the collection, sell it and divide the proceeds, or return the artworks to their countries of origin." The room erupted into arguments. Robert insisted on keeping the collection. Michael and Sarah debated the merits of selling. Tom, overwhelmed, remained silent. As the debate raged, Grace observed the shifting dynamics. She saw Michael's usual bravado falter as he grappled with his mother's revelations. Sarah, typically focused on herself, showed glimpses of genuine concern for the family's legacy. Tom, still unsure of his place, found his voice. "Shouldn't we consider what's right, not just what's profitable?" His words cut through the noise, causing everyone to pause. Evelyn smiled, a mix of pride and sadness in her eyes. "This is your test," she said softly. "Your chance to prove you've learned from our family's mistakes." As the night wore on, Evelyn shared more stories. She spoke of the joy she felt watching her children grow, the pride in their accomplishments, and the pain of their estrangement. "I wasn't perfect," she admitted, "but everything I did out of love." By the time dessert was served, the mood had shifted. The initial tension had given way to a fragile understanding. Michael and Sarah, confronted with the reality of their mother's sacrifices, showed genuine remorse for their past actions. Tom, hearing the full extent of his mother's struggle, felt a deepening connection to the family he'd only just discovered. Even Robert, moved by Evelyn's words, seemed less focused on personal gain and more on the family's legacy. As the evening drew to a close, Evelyn made her final statement. "You have 1 week to come to a unanimous decision about the art collection. Your choice will determine the future of our family's legacy." She turned to Grace. "You'll oversee this process, ensure fairness and legality in whatever they decide." Grace nodded, feeling the weight of this responsibility. As the family members left, each lost in thought, Evelyn called Tom back. "You've been quiet," she said gently. Tom hesitated. "I'm not sure I belong in this decision. I've only just become part of this family." Evelyn took his hand. "You've always been part of this family, even when we were apart. Your voice matters, perhaps more than you know." With that, Evelyn retired to her room, leaving her children to grapple with the monumental decision before them. Grace, watching the family disperse, knew the real challenge was just beginning. The next week would determine not just the fate of a priceless art collection, but the very soul of the Caldwell family. As she gathered her notes, Grace couldn't help but wonder. Could this fractured family come together to make the right choice? Or would greed and old resentments tear them apart for good? The clock was ticking, and Evelyn's time was running out. The Caldwells had 1 week to prove they were worthy of their mother's trust and the legacy she was entrusting to them. The Caldwell mansion was shrouded in silence. Just hours after the family dinner, Evelyn had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The news hit the family like a thunderbolt, leaving them stunned and grief-stricken. As per Evelyn's instructions, Grace called the family together for the reading of the will. Michael, Sarah, Tom, and Robert gathered in the study, their faces etched with a mixture of sorrow and anticipation. Grace cleared her throat, her voice steady as she began to read. I, Evelyn Caldwell, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. The room was thick with tension as Grace continued. She outlined Evelyn's assets, including the mansion, various investments, and personal belongings. Then came the surprises. To my son, Michael, Grace read, I leave my share in Caldwell Enterprises with the condition that 30% of all future profits be donated to local charities. Michael's jaw dropped. This was far less than he'd expected, and the condition stunned him. To my daughter, Sarah, I leave my personal jewelry collection in a trust fund to be used exclusively for education and career development. Sarah's eyes widened. The jewelry was valuable, but the restrictions on the trust fund were unexpected. To my son, Tom, Grace continued, I leave the Caldwell family home and a separate trust fund, equal to that of his siblings. Tom looked shocked. He'd never expected to inherit anything, let alone the family home. As for the art collection, Grace paused, building suspense. Its fate will be determined by the unanimous decision of my children, as discussed in our final family meeting. The siblings exchanged glances, the weight of this responsibility sinking in. Grace then revealed Evelyn's plan for the mansion. The property is to be converted into a community center and museum, showcasing local artists and providing education programs for underprivileged youth. Robert, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. This is preposterous. The family fortune squandered on charity? Grace held up a hand. There's more. She turned to a television in the corner of the room. Evelyn left a video message for you all. The screen flickered to life, revealing Evelyn's face. She looked tired but determined. My dear children, she began. If you're watching this, I've passed on, but I have one last secret to share and one last challenge for you. The family leaned forward, hanging on every word. The art collection I told you about? It's not just valuable, it's controversial. Many pieces were acquired during times of war and upheaval. Some may have been looted or unfairly purchased. Gasps filled the room as Evelyn continued. Your challenge is this: investigate the provenance of each piece. Those that were obtained ethically can be kept or sold. Those with questionable histories must be returned to their rightful owners or countries of origin. Michael and Sarah exchanged shocked glances. Tom leaned back, processing this information. This is your chance to right the wrongs of the past, Evelyn's recording continued, to show that the Caldwell name stands for integrity, not just wealth. As the video ended, the room fell into stunned silence. Grace watched as emotions played across the siblings' faces. Michael looked conflicted, the businessman in him warring with his newfound conscience. Sarah's eyes were filled with tears, the reality of her mother's expectations finally sinking in. Tom seemed overwhelmed but determined, ready to take on this unexpected responsibility. This is insane, Robert sputtered. You can't possibly agree to this. But the siblings weren't listening to him. They were looking at each other, a new understanding passing between them. Mom trusted us with this, Tom said quietly. We can't let her down. Michael nodded slowly. It won't be easy, but I think it's the right thing to do. Sarah wiped her eyes. We owe it to her. To make things right. Grace felt a surge of pride. Despite their past conflicts, the Caldwell children were coming together, united by their mother's final wish. There's one more thing, Grace said, pulling out an envelope. Evelyn left personal letters for each of you. She asked that you read them in private. As she handed out the letters, Grace could see the mix of emotions on each face. Anticipation, fear, hope. You have a big decision ahead of you, Grace reminded them. Evelyn's challenge won't be easy to meet, but I'm here to help in any way I can. The siblings nodded, each clutching their letter. They knew that whatever was written inside would likely change their lives forever. As they left the study one by one to read their mother's final words, Grace couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The real test of the Caldwell family was yet to come. Would they rise to Evelyn's challenge? Could they put aside their differences and work together to right the wrongs of the past? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The legacy of Evelyn Caldwell would live on, not just in her wealth, but in the values she sought to instill in her children, even from beyond the grave. The days following Evelyn's funeral were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions for the Caldwell family. The reality of their mother's final wishes began to sink in, bringing with it a mix of challenges and revelations. Michael paced in his office, phone pressed to his ear. There must be a way to contest this, he argued with his lawyer. But as he spoke, his eyes drifted to the framed photo of Evelyn on his desk. The memory of her video message played in his mind, and he felt a pang of guilt. "Never mind," he said abruptly, hanging up. Across town, Sarah sat in a coffee shop, staring at her bank statement. The trust fund restrictions felt like a slap in the face. She considered calling her own lawyer, but stopped short. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "This is your chance to show integrity." Sarah sighed, realizing the depth of change her mother expected from her. Tom, meanwhile, threw himself into planning the community center. He arranged meetings with local officials and architects, determined to honor Evelyn's vision. However, he quickly encountered resistance. At a town hall meeting, a resident stood up, voice angry. "We don't need outsiders telling us what our community needs." Tom felt the weight of his newfound responsibility. "I'm not an outsider," he said calmly. "This is my home too, and I want to help." The room fell silent, considering his words. Grace found herself working overtime, navigating the legal complexities of Evelyn's wishes. She pored over documents late into the night, feeling the pressure to get everything right. But as she worked, she couldn't help but reflect on how Evelyn had changed her life. The older woman's wisdom and strength had left a lasting impact. As the family grappled with their new reality, they were forced to confront the consequences of their past actions. Michael, reviewing old business records, was shocked to discover the extent of damage his aggressive tactics had caused to local businesses. "I had no idea," he muttered, shame washing over him. Sarah, volunteering at a local women's shelter as part of her trust fund requirements, came face to face with women she'd once looked down upon. Their stories of struggle and resilience humbled her, forcing her to reconsider her priorities. The family's journey of self-discovery was interrupted by an unexpected legal hurdle. Grace called an emergency meeting. "There's a problem with the community center plans," she explained. "Zoning laws are preventing the conversion of the mansion." The siblings looked at each other, realizing they'd have to work together to overcome this obstacle. It was a new experience for them, cooperating instead of competing. "I might have a solution," Tom offered hesitantly. He outlined a plan that combined Michael's business acumen, Sarah's social connections, and his own community insights. To everyone's surprise, it was a solid proposal. As they worked on the plan, old tensions began to fade. Michael found himself impressed by Tom's dedication. Sarah discovered she enjoyed collaborating with her brothers. Slowly, years of mistrust began to melt away. Grace watched this transformation with a mix of professional satisfaction and personal joy. She realized that Evelyn's true legacy wasn't just the wealth or the art collection, but the chance for her children to become a real family. As the weeks passed, the impact of Evelyn's decisions on the community became clear. Local artists, excited about the prospect of the new museum, began reaching out. Families inquired about educational programs. The Caldwell name, once associated with ruthless business practices, was beginning to mean something positive. One evening, as the siblings pored over plans for the community center, Michael suddenly laughed. "Mom would love this," he said, gesturing to their collaborative effort. Sarah and Tom smiled in agreement. The moment was interrupted by Grace entering the room, her face serious. "We need to talk about the art collection," she said. "I've completed the initial investigation into its provenance. Some of the pieces, well, the history is more complicated than we thought." The siblings exchanged glances, knowing they faced another difficult decision. The art collection represented not just immense wealth, but a moral dilemma that would test their newfound unity. "We should sleep on it," Tom suggested. "Make our decision in the morning." As they prepared to leave, Michael stopped at the door. "Whatever we decide," he said, looking at his siblings, "we do it together, as a family." Sarah and Tom nodded in agreement. They had come too far to let this final challenge divide them. Grace watched them go, feeling a mix of anticipation and worry. The next day would determine not just the fate of a priceless art collection, but the future of the Caldwell family itself. As she gathered her files, she couldn't help but think that somewhere, Evelyn was watching, hoping her children would make the right choice. The stage was set for a final decision that would either cement the family's transformation or undo all the progress they had made. The Caldwells were about to face their ultimate test. The Caldwell mansion stood transformed, its imposing facade now welcoming and full of life. Today marked the grand opening of the Evelyn Caldwell Center for Community Support, a testament to one family's journey from discord to unity. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony began, Michael stepped forward looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Welcome, everyone," he began. "This center represents more than just a building. It's a promise to our community and a tribute to our mother's vision." Sarah, standing beside him, added, "We've learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch." Her words, once unimaginable from the self-centered socialite, drew appreciative nods from the crowd. Tom, the final sibling to speak, said simply, "This is our home, and you are our family. Let's build a better future together." The center bustled with activity. In one wing, the shelter for single mothers welcomed its first residents. Sarah, drawing from her own experiences, had taken a personal interest in designing support programs for these women. Michael, to everyone's surprise, was in the financial literacy classroom, teaching budgeting skills to a group of teenagers. His business acumen, once used for personal gain, now served to empower others. In the art gallery, Tom guided visitors through an exhibition. The Caldwell art collection, once hidden away, now served as an educational tool. Each piece told a story not just of artistic value, but of cultural heritage and the importance of ethical stewardship. Grace watched all this unfold, a sense of pride and accomplishment washing over her. She'd done more than just execute a will. She'd helped facilitate a family's transformation. As the day progressed, stories of Evelyn's impact on the community emerged. Longtime residents shared memories of her quiet acts of kindness. Former employees spoke of her integrity and compassion. The Caldwell name, once associated with corporate greed, was being redefined. The highlight of the day was the unveiling of a memorial garden dedicated to Evelyn. As the family gathered around the centerpiece, a beautiful sculpture of intertwined hands, Grace stepped forward with an envelope. "I found this in Evelyn's desk," she explained. "It's addressed to all of you." Michael opened the letter, his siblings gathering close. Evelyn's final words to her children were full of love, wisdom, and hope for their future. As Michael read aloud, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. The letter concluded with a challenge. "My darlings, you've taken the first step. Now, continue to grow, to learn, and to give. Your journey is just beginning." As the sun began to set, the Caldwell siblings stood in the garden, arms around each other. They watched as community members mingled, children played, and a sense of hope filled the air. Michael fingered the medallion around his neck, now a symbol of their shared legacy. "You know," he said softly, "I think Mom would be proud." Sarah nodded, wiping a tear. "She is. I can feel it." Tom smiled, looking out at the transformed mansion and grounds. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" They stood in silence, contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain, the growth, the unexpected joy of reconnection. Evelyn's love had guided them, even from beyond, to become the family she always knew they could be. As night fell and the celebration continued around them, the Caldwell siblings knew that while one chapter had closed, a new, hopeful one was just beginning. Evelyn's legacy would live on, not just in the center that bore her name, but in the hearts and actions of her children and the community they now served. If you've been moved by the Caldwell family's journey of redemption and transformation, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please like this video and share in the comments how Evelyn's wisdom has inspired you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of family, love, and second chances. Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your family's legacy. The power to change lies within you.